Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Stuart Brown, a partner for digital business at Guidehouse. Stuart, good to have you with us.
Great. Thanks for having me, Tom.
And you know something about artificial intelligence. It's something you've followed for quite a while. What do you see as the big trends in 2025 for AI as we come out of the hoopla and a lot of the press over the large language models? Things are sifting out a little bit, I think.
This year is going to be that year where things really sort of get logarithmic in some of the advancements. We saw that with DeepSeek. We're starting to see that with the 03 release from OpenAI and others. I think this is the year we're going to see really huge leaps in both efficiency and you know less hallucinations, more accuracy in data, but more importantly, more multi-threaded thinking. We saw that with deep research a couple of weeks ago, which if I know not everybody's tried that yet, but it's just unbelievable how it can do like really deep reasoning and go across and ask some clarifying questions. And so I think this is the year where we're really going to, as individuals, as corporations, I think as consumers really learn how to use it, but also it's going to be a year of, trials and error. I think as people really start to understand how does this impact my day to day. And I don't know what's coming next, but I can imagine if that's all we got in January, and I think the DeepSeek piece clearly kicked some things into touch early that were in development. My guess is the next levels and the next levels will be coming at us much faster than we can anticipate.
Is there a little bit of irony here, though, possibly, in that people, agencies, and other users that are trying to apply these large language models are looking at much more fine grained and limited domain applications of them? And so the giganticness of the deep seeks and the open AIs and the chat GPTs are interesting, but maybe not as practical as narrowing it down to a single domain for a real application.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I think a lot of people have been using it as table stakes type of use cases to this point, right? It's almost like an enhanced search function. It gives you a little more intelligence and helps you answer some questions in maybe a more broad, more cohesive way. But I think yes, we haven't seen the cross data silo usage yet because frankly, the architectures aren't ready for it, especially in the federal world. I think in the commercial world, we're starting to see this. I actually like the way Microsoft describes this idea of a data fabric, this idea that all my data sources sort of, can communicate with this fabric and it allows them to, provide their insight and information without having to hard code in transactions. So I think as we see these small bespoke use cases, table stake cases prove value, we'll quickly see adoption of uh, uh, changing the architectures as well as the underlying systems to allow for that inside the organizations. But it's going to take some heavy lift.
And what you've said so far raises a couple of questions, and I'm just going to march right through them for you. One is you mentioned multi threaded thinking. What is that?
Yeah, it's the idea like, when you think about a search, you type in a question, you get an answer. We think about queries, the things we used to do in the past. We would write a SQL statement and we'd get an answer back and we'd have an index table. Now we need to think about a reasoning model, one that's looking across and actually knowing where to go look for the answer as opposed to being told where the answer is. So if you expose the data to it, the idea of saying, this is the question I'm trying to solve. And if you look at an organization, a lot of the data that resides in organizations today is not utilized unless someone knows where it is. And so the ability to, if we build our architecture to where that data is exposed, similar to how our brains work. If you and I got a question like this, we are going to go to our reasoning model and say, I heard this here, I heard that there, I saw this on this podcast, and here's how I would interpret all of that for me to explain it to you and the way I explain things. It's exactly the same concept in that, this idea of continuing down a path to get to an answer and asking itself questions as it goes is exactly the kind of thing we want to get to. And you can imagine what that'll mean for customer service. What will that mean for all those kind of things as we move forward, right?
Right. Okay. And then the other question was when you mentioned architectures for artificial intelligence usage, what does that mean in the context of general systems agencies are operating to do their work?
Yeah, I think this is the tricky part, right? I mean, what do the architectures mean at this point are really tricky, right? I think there's architecture of how the AI is going to operate, in that having a responsible AI architecture that understands things like hallucinations and security and user permissions and bias and all those things that humans apply to their thinking. We need the models to apply that to our thinking as well. And we need to have a predictability from an organizational perspective that the answer it's giving is one that we trust, or it's within the range of trust where the human or the user or the consumer can make the decision. So that's one piece. And then there's really the more complex piece of, you think of in the past, infrastructure and technology were about systems and the data was an output. Here, the data is the core of our organization. It's the core of how we serve. And that's sort of flipping the script a little bit. So then you've got to get into a couple of things. Is our data accurate and good? Is our data secure and is it tagged correctly? In that, if, Tom, if you ask a question or I ask a question, depending on our level and depending on the question, we would get different answers because we're only allowed to have certain information, right? So we've got to be really careful as we start to exposing our data sets to the AI intelligence that we're also applying on top of that our security procedures, our responsibility matrices, and all those kind of things to make sure that we're not violating either core competencies of our organization or regulatory competencies as well as we move forward, right?
It seems like then that you also have to work on the prompt side of things, such that users say, give me 5 ways I can get Sally fired, or some kind of a crazy thing like that. Because it could give you a good answer, and that's not what the system was installed for.
Well, it's a great point. And no offense to Sally, but I think the challenge becomes that generative models today always want to answer you. I used to use an analogy, I still do, that they're sort of like puppies, right? If you tell the puppy to go you say fetch the frisbee, and it comes back with a ball. All it knows is it fetched. It doesn't yet know the difference between a frisbee and a ball, and you have to train it. So yeah, you could ask a question, how do I get Sally fired? And that would be the wrong question to ask. You want to make sure that your AI matrices within the organization could stop that. But it does come down to, as you think about how prompts are going to be generated in the future, and right now we're typing them in. The reality is the way that we're going to interact with this is going to be much more natural. We're going to get emails and pings and Teams or Zoom and other things, and it's going to automatically think as it comes in, right? We're going to get information intelligence. It's going to offer us options. This customer's complaining about something, and here's all the information. Here's why they're probably complaining. We might want to answer back with this. The other thing, we are going to type or talk to our intelligence inside the organization, and it will also pre-think for us. And we've got to have the ultimate sort of decision on where it goes and what happens. And that's where, in my mind, I use the generative part of generative AI. I think about the human because we're the generative part of that. We're the ones that know if this seems right or not. And so I do think there is there's a thought process as an organization we need to go through here to make sure that you can ask the right questions, and we'll get to the point where we're going to have dozens, if not more, of large language models and intelligence models behind our user interface. And so when the person, the human, the bot, it could be either, ask the question, it should know where to route that question. So which model do I go to based on cost, accuracy, information, security, all those things. But also at the same time, is this a question we should be answering as an organization? And I think that's where that when you asked that architecture question earlier, and I started with the sort of the AI architecture, it's that architecture that says this is how we're going to operate in an AI world, which is new to IT organizations. We haven't dealt with that kind of architecture before. We're used to systems architecture, application architectures, network architectures. Now we're going to have to get into sort of really a strong AI architecture that infuses all of that in sort of like a cloud, like dark matter around all of them, right?
Sure. And to that end, the idea of the data fabric comes in. And you mentioned that earlier. Talk more about what a data fabric is, what it looks like, how it should operate, and how it supports this idea of the AI architecture that's safe.
Yeah, happy to. I think so. The data fabric ones, I use the term, it's a Microsoft term, but I use it because I like it, right? I mean, it's a visualization, and I'm a visual guy that works. If you think about all your core systems being in the central core hub, right, of this clean nucleus of what the systems of record are in your organization. In the past, those would dump out databases, obviously, and then we would take those databases and replicate them into a data lake so we could, we can go swimming in the lake and get what we need, and we'd have to build interfaces and all of that. The idea of the fabric is this idea that those systems of record, those source systems, and real-time information, whether it's text, speech, voice, emails, whatever, they all touch this fabric that surrounds that core. And so when you ask a question inside the fabric, it sort of vibrates through and sort of knows, the intelligence knows, what you're asking me. It understands the context of how you're asking it. It knows where we get that information, and it can then follow and reason, as we've talked earlier about asking various questions. So the data doesn't move, right? You're exposing the data in a secure way, and it's looking at the data as if you and I, back in the day, Tom, and we're probably both older than some of these 22-year-olds out there, we would have
Uh,
multiple, we would screen slide. We'd go from this application to that application and cut and paste from this one into that one to do this. It's doing all that what we would have done in the past with multi-screens. And so that's the idea that but it's a secure layer that again has that rules and responsibility framework built on top of it, as well as that hierarchy layer that says who can touch this data and who can't. So that's what I like. That's why I like the concept of the fabric, because I view it as this literal fabric covering the core of our key systems.
It's where the metadata then would live, and that's
Correct.
important to the AI bots and so forth when you mention, which sources and which models do I go to for a given query.
Correct. Correct. And it's funny. It's many times I've talked to a lot of boards and CEOs about this, and the CEO will turn to me, with the tech people in the room and say, "Well, I'm told we can't do this because our data is bad. It's not clean." And I'm like, "Great. So you're making decisions with bad data today. You just don't know it." And they look at me like, "Oh, I never thought about that way." Like, yeah, your data's siloed. And by the way, that data you think you trust is going to make a decision and pass it down the line as if it's sacrosanct, and it's not. Right. And so this idea that we can then elevate that into a way that in the context of how that data is used, you go, the smart user goes, that doesn't make sense. Like something's wrong, and they go find it. So yeah, it's complex. It's simple in its application, complex in its architecture, right? I think we're just in the early days of how this architecture is going to work for CIOs and CTOs and others. And early adopters are rebuilding what they built, and that's okay. We need the early adopters. We saw this with cloud as well, and I think that's perfectly fine.
And one of the implications of all this then is that you need a team to devise your AI architecture and usage plan. It sounds like that should include your data officers.
It should, and it's got to be your forward-thinking data officers. I don't mean to insult data officers out there, but a lot of time data scientists and data officers will say, "Well, we've been doing this for years, and it's the same." It's not the same. It is one giant now broader continuum of data, and it elevates those data officers up to much more of a board level conversation, right? So what ends up happening is in the past we used to say that the speedometer or the gas pedal for transformation back in the day it used to be servers and OSs and kernels, and now we're on the cloud. It becomes more the application, the procurement of it, and all that stuff. Well, the data officers don't want to be the parachute here, right? So they're being elevated to the you're not moving fast enough for the business and or the transformation we need to have. And so it's a new role for data officers to play, frankly, and one they need to be ready to have because they're not used to sitting at that table going, I'm here, let's move faster. They're usually the ones sort of, two or three levels downstream of that decision.
It seems like in recent years, the federal agencies, like IT staffs everywhere, the CIO crew, and so on, have understood the need for continuous modernization. And there's a lot of reasons for that, for
Mhm.
efficiency, for making sure you have the latest technology that works, and for customer experience and all these things, and internal experience. So maybe discuss the use of artificial intelligence as a thing in and of itself to get answers and insights, but also the application of AI in pursuit of modernization goals where the AI is should be invisible to what's going on.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one people get lost in on the sort of, the sexiness of AI and all the cool stuff it can do on the front end is that its ability to drive efficiency inside of a not just an IT shop, but in front an enterprise architecture is massive. I mean, we've seen, I think the stats we've seen similar at 40 to 60% of the work hours done within commercial space, inside the corporate space, is generative in nature. That doesn't mean you're replacing them all, but it means these are things that could benefit from AI. So whether it's, marketing with creating content, whether it's HR with recruiting, performance management, whether it's resume shifting, all of those kind of things, to legal documents, red lines, I mean, there's just so many great things. And in IT, of course, we went to the past. We had to sort of make this in the past. We'd have to sort of get systems that would bring, we'd code in alerts, but then we'd have thousands of alerts. And how do you know which one is real and which one is not? And now we have if you apply AI models, there'll be predetermined patterns that we get from, the market that are, this is a good pattern for IT operations. This is a good pattern for HR monitoring. This is a good pattern for security. And then as we start to train those with how we do it inside of the organization that we're in, whether it's a commercial or federal organization, it'll then start to really drive continuity of how we operate in our organization. This is the part that excites me the most. I was working with some companies before I joined Guidehouse, which were, large manufacturing, and they had, these aren't the things a lot of the Gen Z folks were going into. And if they did, they didn't stay as long. So the older people that were training were getting frustrated because they were leaving, all that stuff that goes with that. But this idea that when those older boomers and others retire, that how we operate and the standards we do and all that is not just in the voice they give to the new hire, but that it's built into the process. That the process will say, for this question, this is how we shipped something, or this question, this is how we procure something. And if you want to override it, you can, but you've got to give the model a reason. That to me is where it gets really interesting. So you can look and say there's a ton inside of an it just the simple stuff like, just performance management. The ability to optimize that at a time of year when it's just, massive, especially I imagine the government even has a harder problem with this. It just makes it so much more personal to people. Because you get priorities at the beginning of the year, and does everybody remember those at the end of the year? Maybe not, but this allows you to do that.
Got it. And let's talk about the idea of AI in the inward facing mode first, and then I want to talk about the customer experience or outside. But what do you see as the frontiers for enabling your own employees? Say you're the VA health system or your whatever agency might be, CMS, a lot of transactions, a lot of processing, a lot of decisions to be made that have implications for the constituents served and also for spending federal money. A lot of pressure on those decisions. How can AI enable maybe your internal people to be better?
I mean, it is it's the coolest thing as you start rolling it out. Think about how it can impact those employees' lives and how they serve the customers or constituents out there, because the ability to help them get some of the mundane stuff out of the way should be, number one. Filling in paperwork and those kind of things, those should be really simple for us to do, and we should do that. We should do that pretty quickly. Then you start getting into how do we make sure that we are giving the best solution or offer to that person, not just based on the data set maybe we have. You think about the VA, right? I mean, if you have a data set within the VA, that's probably a pretty robust data set, but maybe there's other components of the data graph that we have on that individual within the federal government that'll inform us on how to offer them something unique that maybe in the VA we don't know about. So eventually you could see this idea that as a someone who's dealing with the customer every day, or the patient, or whatever, that we are more rapidly getting to solve their problem. And I think that's the biggest frustration people have with the government, is that they feel like things go in a hole and sort of disappear, and they don't, but it does seem that way because we don't see it and we don't have control of it. And so this idea that, we all hate when we call into an IVR and it says, enter your information, press whatever, and you do, and then you get the next person says, enter your information, press whatever, you get the next person, and you're like, I just did this 3 times. It'd be great if we call in, or when I come into like my father-in-law, he goes in the VA to get treatment. They already know who he is. They know what he's gone before, and understanding that he's got a new symptom, and the AI could automatically know everything going on and come up with a recommendation based on prior treatments of other things that this practitioner or this nurse may not know about. That's doable, and it's doable now. It's going to take some of that infrastructure we talked about, and it's going to take some IT and some work, but it can be done.
And what's the decision tree or decision process for knowing when AI will help with these kinds of processes, when simple robotic process automation might be enough, or even just a script, because you
Yeah,
can
that's a good.
maybe overdo it sometimes?
You can, though. I mean, I wonder long term where that line is going to be drawn, right? I think just core stuff that's purely press if A, press B, if B, press C. Those, I think you can do RPA on those kind of things, the robotic process automation and some scripting. And I think you don't need to go fancy. That's back to my core story, right? If you've got things inside the core that are working, don't mess with them, right? There's no need to go redo everything. Whereas in the old days, if we were tying these systems together, we would have to go through an entire transformation process to make sure everything ticked and tied in every system. This field has 8 characters and that field has 7. Oh my goodness, we got to go like all of that should be out the window. So I think those RPA things, it should be simple tasks that are or that are repeatable, but also we should put intelligence on top of those as well, which you can do with a lot of the tech that's coming. And then really you want to focus on those areas where there is a reasoning to it, and maybe where it's across data domain, right? I think that to me is really where it starts to add more value. I wouldn't, if I was starting today, I wouldn't go, uh, massively deep on a new RPA without thinking about generative AI on top of it as a spouse, basically.
Sure. And then let's talk about the customer experience, the constituent facing side of deploying this, and where do you begin there, and what are the best use cases?
Well, this is the promise. You hear a lot of talk lately around blockchain in the government and a bunch of other stuff that we're hearing from Doge and others. I think this is the promise of, um, like I was saying earlier, this idea that it doesn't go into a black hole, that there is going to be much more customer-oriented service, much more information available to you. I mean, you could see a time when we're constantly, that the data is so linked in that we're constantly making decisions and being recommended decisions based on tax policy instead of waiting once a year. So I think it's almost limitless to think about the capability. I love your VA example because it's such a personal one. You can think about, defined care, getting your prescriptions, getting all that filled without having to make those phone calls and the conversations, all that. It could literally say, I saw you went to here, I saw your appointment. We made this, we've already put it to your, we're gonna send this to your pharmacy. We're going to set your next schedule. It looks like on your calendar, which is your personal calendar, which they can't see, but you can see, you've got the next Friday booked. So you can't do that. You want me to move it to the next Tuesday? That kind of just interaction and understanding that I own the data of, so is important. And then if you even go further and say, as we anonymize that data and we start looking at trends and procedures, that there's someone maybe going through something similar where the recommendation from a data perspective, it can say, maybe we can treat you differently, whether it's an IRS case, whether it's a VA case or whatever. So I just think it's one of those things we're going to know it when we feel it, but I think it's going to happen pretty rapidly. And you know, uh, the challenge becomes, are the systems ready?
Maybe quickly describe the concept of a secure persona and what that can do for agency operations and customer experience.
Well, I mean, it depends on how you define secure persona. There's two ways I'll look at that. One, there's like my persona, like this idea that there's a digital Stuart, and that I own my digital persona. I'll just two ways this, and I'll talk to the security side in a second. To me, there's a great aspect of me, me as a persona coming, and I tap that into other AIs to bring my preferences, my billing, all those kind of things that really help expedite whatever service I'm getting, whether that be a commercial service or a federal service. I think that's one where I own the data and I decide who gets that data, and then I can track where that data goes, and then rescind it at any time. I think that's a big one. I think the flip side of that is, and that's so the interesting thing is like no one can file a tax return on my behalf. No one can go get a car loan on my behalf. Those things that happen
Mhm.
all the time. I think they've happened to all of us. Those kind of things without having to pay $30 a month to an organization. It just happened. It's just part of the service that's provided. Now, on the flip side of that, what I would say, one interesting thing about AI is people talk about the risk of AI, and the security of AI. Oh, we're going to get hacked more. Actually, I think I've talked to good friends of mine very high up in some of these big hyperscalers. I think it's the opposite. I think AI is going to make us way more secure. And the reasoning for that is it sees more. It sees more than any human can. Like we all know, okay, check the email header, don't click on the link that says you're going to get free whatever, but it happens every day. But the reality is, if you think about the way the security models are going to be trained at the Microsofts, the Googles, AWSs, and others, um, they're being trained on millions and millions of servers around the world. So it's basically like buying the most highly trained junkyard dog you can get. And then when it points at your yard, which by the way is not complex, it is basically the same level of protection, whether you're a corporation or whether you're an individual. It's been trained at the highest level. So you can imagine how many times those big hyperscalers are getting attacked on a minute by minute basis. I think the idea of the pattern recognition, we used to call that, what's the brand? I can't remember now, but like, the idea of looking at those patterns within security, it'll come to me in a second, is now ubiquitous, right? And I think we're going to be more secure. The human is still the problem factor here. Stop
Sure.
clicking things, people. Don't, you did
Right.
not win a free Corvette. You're not, don't click, don't, your package is not being held for you. You did not win. Nigerian
Right.
Prince did not, make you a millionaire. But other than that, we get past that, we should be good.
All right. And we have about 30 seconds left. Just what
Okay.
should agencies do to prepare for this next generation, if you will, of AI, large language, small language models?
Well, I think quickly, I mean, they're all going to get asked optimized. We see that coming, right? So the question is, status quo, I don't think is going to work. So number one, you went there early, which is look internally for optimization. Where can I get near-term table stakes optimization? And then start thinking about some cross-use business cases that really are sort of business changing, and how you serve your constituents, your customers or whatever. I think those things right there, but and those need to go in parallel, right? Don't do them in serial. It just doesn't work. But I mean, you can do it, but you're going to miss out on the opportunity. But really start thinking about the procurement you have out there now, the infrastructure you're going to put in, and say, I need to be ready to be able to handle this.
Stuart Brown is a partner for digital business at Guidehouse. Great having you with us. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks, Tom. It was great to be with you.
And I'm Federal Drive host Tom Temin. You're watching Federal News Network. Let's go back to the studio now for more on the AI and data exchange.